Welcome, everybody. This workshop is the first in a series of 3 designed to build the capacity of the educators in the region to leverage technology to deliver quality remote instruction. Today, we're going to be talking about supporting student engagement in a virtual environment. We provided a live virtual session of this training to Tennessee educators in December of 2020. While this is an asynchronous recording, we will still provide the discussion prompts and poll questions that we administered during the training. During this time, we encourage you to pause the recording and reflect on these questions. We have also produced training recordings on 2 additional topics: monitoring academic progress and providing feedback to students, and designing effective instruction for a hybrid model. Before we get into the content, we'll take a moment to highlight some key features in the Zoom platform that may be helpful to know if you implement this training virtually. The bar on the bottom is your control panel. You can mute yourself or hide your video using the microphone and camera buttons on the bottom left. We encourage you and those you meet with to leave your video on when feasible, particularly when we are in small group breakouts to help facilitate conversation. During the live session, we use the chat to gather responses from participants to a number of prompts. They also use the chat to submit questions along the way. If you decide to organize breakout room discussions, participants will see this message inviting them to join. If they need to return to the main room at any point during a breakout session, they can select the Leave Breakout Room button. Now, we're ready to get started. Let's start by reviewing our agenda. First, we have welcome and introductions. Second, train the trainer structure. Third, overview of student engagement. Fourth, behavioral engagement. Fifth, emotional engagement. Sixth, mental engagement. And number 7, we'll close with our wrap up and next steps. During the live session, we administered a poll asking participants about their professional role. You might consider adapting this poll for your own audience. One of the ways to enhance engagement is to establish social presence when presenting online. It's a way to facilitate communication so that you feel like you're engaging in human-to-human interaction rather than human-machine interaction. It sets the stage for things like getting to know each other and developing a sense of connection. Each workshop facilitator will introduce themselves and establish social presence by sharing a favorite quote. If you use this introduction activity when you present the material, it would be helpful if you paste your quote into the chat for participants to see. I'm Victoria Schaefer, and I am the Training, Coaching, and Technical Support Lead for REL Appalachia and a team member on this project. My favorite quote comes from Benjamin Franklin and my mother: "Never put off until tomorrow what you can do today." Jill, I'm going to turn it over to you now to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Victoria. I am Jill Marcus. I'm happy to be part of this REL Appalachia project. And my favorite quote is from E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web, among other things. And he said something that makes a lot of sense to me, which is, "I get up every morning determined to both change the world and to have a really good time. And sometimes this makes planning my day difficult." Mary, how about you?
Hi, I'm Mary Clute. I'm from SRI International in REL Appalachia. And my quote is one that a yoga teacher used to say a lot, and it's something that comes to mind a lot, which is, "Worry is not preparation." How about you, Emma?
Hi, my name is Emma Pellerin. I am a research associate at REL Appalachia and with SRI International. And my favorite quote is from Margaret Mead. And she said that you should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Now back to you, Victoria.
Thank you. You may encourage participants to introduce themselves in the chat and share their favorite quote when you implement this workshop yourself. Before we move on, we'd also like to recognize other REL Appalachia staff members whose contributions were integral to the development of this workshop, including Imnet Shibre, Corey Hamilton-Biagas, Jessica Mislevy, and Stephanie Wilkerson. The workshop facilitators are part of the Regional Educational Laboratory Program administered by the U.S. Department of Education Institute of Education Sciences. The 10 regional educational laboratories work in partnership with stakeholders to conduct applied research and trainings. The mission of the REL program is to support a more evidence-based education system. Through the REL program, we carry out 3 main activities. We conduct a wide variety of applied research studies. We provide educators and other stakeholders with training, coaching, and technical support needed to use research findings and evidence in the classroom to improve teaching and learning. And we disseminate findings from research in ways that educators and policymakers can use in practice. In short, the REL program offers support to state education agencies, local education agencies, and schools that helps practitioners use evidence-based practices. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. We at REL Appalachia are working with our states and districts on quite a diverse set of projects. In the Appalachia region, we partner with a variety of state and local stakeholders in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia to work on several education-related issues, including improving post-secondary transitions, early literacy, using data and evidence across states, and more. For more information about the projects we're working on, we encourage you to visit the REL Appalachia website through the link on your screen. Now, Emma, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Before we transition into the workshop content, I want to take a few minutes to review the Train the Trainer workshop series structure. This workshop is designed for you to take to your home district and present to your colleagues, either all at once, as we'll do today, or in up to 3 30-minute sections. You can see that there are 3 sections of content: one on behavioral engagement, one on emotional engagement, and one on mental engagement. And each of these sections can be presented during a different session if that's what works for you. Of course, if you have more than 30 minutes to present a section, then you can allow for more time for interactivity. If you decide, for example, if your district has a professional development day scheduled where you might have different options to choose from, this workshop could be presented as one of the options. To support you in delivering the trainings, we have developed a slide deck that you can use in your trainings, handouts to share with your participants, and a facilitator's handbook. These materials are available on the REL Appalachia website. The important item for you to find is handout 1, which contains bullet points of all the relevant findings we dug out of the research for you. It also has references to the full studies for you or anyone who wants to learn about how the strategies we will be looking at were implemented and studied. Handout 2 is an organizer that could serve as a handy cheat sheet to remind you and your teachers of all the content that we'll be discussing today. Although we're not using that handout in today's workshop, we thought it might be useful to you as you plan your presentations. These handouts are in the facilitator's handbook. Here's what's in your facilitator's handbook. 1, a section on how to use the facilitator's handbook. 2, a section for welcome and introductions, the overview, section 1 on behavioral engagement, section 2 on emotional engagement, section 3 on mental engagement, and then wrap up and next steps. Each section includes an annotated agenda, detailed content information that provides additional context for the slides, and descriptions and rationale for the activities. We will be modeling some of these activities, check-ins, and best practices today. We are sure that you have a number of effective facilitation strategies that you will like to use that will work as well. At the end of the handbook, you'll find a section on best practices in facilitation that you might find helpful, as well as the materials that you should distribute as handouts, some language you can use to invite people to attend your workshop, and some alternative suggestions for creating breakout rooms and polls. When you see this icon on the slide, it's a signal for you to refer to handout 1, which is included in your facilitator's handbook. After each of our workshops, we wanted to offer some additional supports. We all know that just presenting information is never really enough. Good professional development includes opportunities for follow-up, individual attention, and interaction with other implementers. We hosted office hours in January of 2021 so that participants would have an opportunity to get together to discuss any issues with presenting the training in their home schools. We also created a Q&A document that is available as a Google Doc for trainers to contribute to. Here is an email where you can send any questions for our team to answer. If you'll be delivering this workshop in your district, consider whether you could provide some additional supports as well. For instance, can you be available by email to answer questions? Are there other people in your district who might serve as coaches for teachers? And now I'll turn this back over to Mary.
Thanks, Emma. So we're going to take just a moment to give you the big picture of what we'll be talking about today before we dive into specifics. A great deal of the research has been conducted on the topic of online learning, but much of it has been conducted in contexts that are different than the one we are all in now. For example, quite a bit of research has been conducted in higher education. Although not all of the strategies we'll share today have been rigorously tested by researchers with K-12 students, we've based our presentation on the best available research and research that we believe can translate into your current context. Our focus today is on student engagement, which is a really broad topic. Research on online learning has identified a wide variety of factors that are related to student engagement, including things that technology can do to promote student engagement, things that educators can do to promote student engagement, and things that other adults like parents or online learning mentors can do to support student engagement. Today, we're going to focus on that middle one, things that educators can do to promote student engagement. There are 3 types of engagement described in the research literature as behavioral, affective, and cognitive. For affective and cognitive engagement, we think it's a little easier to use terms that describe the type of energy needed for each type, that is, emotional and mental. Students might vary in their levels of each of these kinds of engagement, and their level of engagement might vary across subjects. The things that educators can do to promote engagement will likely vary depending on individual students' needs. In this presentation, we'll be looking at each of these types of engagement, sharing what the research says about each, and then focusing on what you can do to promote each one. So far, I've been describing what the research says about student engagement more generally, but now I'd like to switch to talking a little bit about a model for K-12 student engagement in online learning. The green triangle illustrates the level of each type of engagement that a student can manage on their own. You can see from the labels, the top point of the triangle represents mental engagement, and the 2 points on the bottom of the triangle represent behavioral and emotional engagement. This yellow triangle illustrates the level of each type of engagement the student needs for academic success. There is often a gap between the two, as illustrated by the white space between the 2 triangles. So what fills this gap for students? The researchers who developed this framework suggest that 2 communities can provide support to fill the gap. The school community, which includes teachers, other students, and school support staff, and the personal community, which includes families, friends, and peers outside of school. These are represented by the light blue and dark blue triangles. The researchers who developed this framework theorize that it doesn't matter which community provides the needed support as long as they have the relevant expertise to provide good support. The type of support needed varies by the type of engagement that needs supporting. Today, we're going to focus on the light blue triangle. That is what you, as part of the school community, including teaching staff and other students, can do to promote student engagement. We will discuss some ideas for engagement strategies that you can use to support students to be academically successful. In the figure I just showed, the gap between what students can manage on their own and what was required is equal for all 3 types of engagement. It doesn't always have to be that way. Some students may need more support for one type of engagement than another. The size of the gap between what is needed and what a student can manage on their own can vary across the 3 types, from student to student and from subject to subject. Imagine some hypothetical students. The figure on the left might depict a student who shows up to online class sessions and turns in assignments on time, but doesn't seem to put much thought into them. You can see in that figure that the gap for behavioral engagement is smaller than for the other two types of engagement. This student likely won't need as much support for behavioral engagement as the other types of engagement. The figure on the right might depict a student who thoughtfully contributes to online discussions, but doesn't attend class regularly or complete assignments outside of class. The gap for this student is smaller for mental engagement than it is for the other two types. This student probably won't need as much support for mental engagement as the other types of engagement. During this presentation, please think about whether and how you are engaged mentally, behaviorally, and emotionally. At this point in the workshop, we asked participants to identify which type of engagement they thought was easiest to influence, behavioral, emotional, or mental. We encourage you to pause the recording and reflect on this question before we're moving forward. Depending on your role, you might think of students in your classroom, your building, or your whole district. To be explicit about the purpose of this activity, it is aligned with one principle of adult learning theory, which states that adults are motivated to learn by the need to solve problems, they need to know why they are learning, and that their previous experience must be respected and built upon. So when you're presenting this workshop to your colleagues, you may want to keep those principles in mind. Activities like this can help people really think about the content of the workshop and to raise the Velcro on their brain to help the information stick. When you deliver this workshop, we encourage you to look at the results and see what type of engagement your audience considers most problematic. You can plan to spend some focused time in that section. Of the three types of engagement, behavioral engagement is the first one that most people think about. These behaviors are the ones that take physical energy and may be the easiest to see. Are the students attending class? Are they doing the work? Are they following procedures? Behavioral engagement is the physical energy that students exert to complete their classwork assignments. This can include things like attendance, participation, and completing work. It makes sense that students' behavioral engagement is an important element of learning, and there is some research that confirms that idea. Research has demonstrated an association between this type of engagement and important student outcomes, such as attendance, grade retention, and dropping out of school. It is important to note that the research summarized on this slide was examining these associations more generally and not necessarily in remote learning. Researchers have suggested three categories of strategies to promote behavioral engagement in online learning. The first is troubleshooting and orienting, which refers to ensuring that students and parents are familiar with the technology they'll be using, as well as the expectations and procedures. Organizing and managing refers to supporting students to manage their time and environment. Monitoring and encouraging progress refers to strategies to make sure that students are keeping up with their coursework, especially for asynchronous or self-paced work. Now Jill will share some ideas for what this might look like in practice.
Thanks, Mary. The next few slides contain the information from handout 1, which is also included in your facilitator's handbook, and note the little handout icon on the corner of the slide. One set of interventions that can promote behavioral engagement is to help students with troubleshooting and orienting. This set of strategies is about understanding what technology students have, how it's working for them, and supporting students to use the technology. We've tried to model this in this workshop by providing slides to orient participants to the Zoom features, both in general and in the breakout rooms. In the case of remote learning, troubleshooting is about thinking about what kinds of things students might struggle with and providing guidance in advance. So the information on this slide is all in handout 1. So to summarize, the research suggests that in order to help students with organizing and managing, we should provide explicit instruction for students in how to self-regulate, including working with them to help them learn to manage their time and set goals and self-evaluate. We should also set up structures that support them to use these strategies, such as individual conferences for goal setting. This information is all in handout 1 as well. Monitoring and encouraging progress are likely to help students become more engaged. Students need to know that they are accountable and that their efforts will be recognized. This means frequent, purposeful communication with students and the other members of their learning network, including parents or counselors. It also means keeping track of how students are doing and following up if there are any signs that they're off track. It's not just a matter of looking at how much time students are spending on their work, as described in the second bullet, but of looking at what students are producing and whether it meets standards. In this workshop, we attempt to monitor and encourage progress with check-ins at the end of each section. We'll model a couple of different techniques, and there are a few others described in your handbook as well. Okay, that was a long list of ideas for how to improve behavioral engagement, and I'm sure that you're already using some of them. At this point in the live workshop, we moved participants to virtual breakout rooms to engage in a discussion about the best ways to improve students' behavioral engagement. We asked them to review the research in the handbook before beginning their discussion. This activity is intended to model a strategy for engaging students, that is, structured small group discussions. The 1 times 3 activity is an example of a discussion structure. In the live workshop, we gave the following instructions about choosing a facilitator, saying we would like the person whose birthday was most recent to act as facilitator, calling on people who want to speak, asking them to introduce themselves, and then answer the questions. Once everyone who wants to speak has had a chance, please manage an open conversation for anyone to ask follow-up questions. Having a facilitator in a breakout room adds another layer of structure to the activity, and providing a mechanism for choosing a facilitator is intended to make it less awkward once people are in the breakout room. The mechanism also allows an opportunity for participants to share just a little bit about themselves before the formal conversation begins. One easy way to check in is to use the polling feature to check understanding. During the live workshop, we asked participants to respond to this poll, asking how well they understood the content and how successfully they might adapt the strategies. We also asked them to list any questions or issues they had, including technology questions, in the chat. You may want to stop the recording for a moment and reflect on how you would answer these questions. And then I will turn it back over to Mary.
Thanks, Jill. All right, now in this section, we're going to be looking at ideas to help you promote positive emotional engagement in your lessons. So you'll remember that emotional engagement is about the emotional energy that students bring to their classwork. This area is a little trickier to focus on. We can't always gauge whether a student is bored or anxious, especially when we aren't in the same room with them. This slide shows the definition of an emotional engagement that we shared earlier and some examples of what it might look like. We are sure that you can think of many other examples that could be included on this list. Here's a snapshot of some of the findings from previous research on emotional engagement. Once again, much of this research is not specific to remote learning, but it sets the stage for why emotional engagement is important. Students who are more emotionally engaged may value school more and feel a greater connection to school, which can in turn be associated with greater academic achievement. Researchers have suggested 2 categories of strategies to promote emotional engagement. The first is facilitating communication and developing relationships. This is important because there is a big risk that students will feel isolated in online learning, so facilitating communication is especially important. As you think about this, you'll need to remember that some kids don't want to talk all the time, so different approaches might need to be used to connect with different students. In addition, instilling excitement for learning can be more challenging when students and teachers are not together in person. Now I'll turn it back over to Jill.
Thanks, Mary. So I'm going to review some of the information that's in handout 1. I'll just make a few points about it. First is cultivating social presence is one way to facilitate communication. And we attempted to do this at the beginning of the workshop when we as facilitators introduced ourselves and shared a favorite quote. You can cultivate social presence when you offer clues to your history, your personality, your current circumstances. As Victoria said earlier, when you experience the social presence of another person, it feels like you're engaging in human-human interaction rather than human-machine interaction. It sets the stage for things like getting to know each other and developing a sense of connection, developing relationships, developing a sense of belonging, overcoming feelings of loneliness or isolation, feeling trust, respect, rapport, and empathy, feeling safe to take an interpersonal risk without fear of ostracism, or ridicule. And there's more information about all of this in your handout. Our earlier breakout room activity was meant to serve as an example of how to engage in deliberate rapport building and how to develop ways for students to engage with each other. This information is also in handout 1. For each of the bullet points listed here, you'll find some additional details that you can read through on your own. To instill excitement for learning, you might consider providing opportunities for social interaction through fun activities like scavenger hunts or instructional activities that are intentionally aligned with students' interests. Okay, we just presented the research on emotional student engagement, what various studies have shown to be effective in the settings where they were implemented. At this point in the live workshop, we moved participants into the virtual breakout rooms and asked them to consider how those strategies can be adapted to work for their students in their context. We asked them to review the research in the handbook before beginning their discussion. For this breakout, we introduced a different type of discussion activity called the 5 whys. It takes a little bit of deeper thinking. The task is to name something you do to promote emotional engagement with your students and then explain why you do that. And to keep explaining why and why and why up to 5 times, or until you can go no deeper because you've reached the most fundamental purpose. Hopefully, this will help to reveal the reasoning behind what you're doing, or it may expose a mismatch between the action and the intention. So for example, you might say, to promote emotional engagement with my students, I use structured breakout discussions. Why? Because a small group allows people to interact more easily. Why? Because students feel greater trust and less risk in speaking up. Why? Because people feel like they can see everyone who is online with them and feel some rapport. Now, you don't have to have 5 whys, you know, 1 or 2 may be plenty. So this time we asked that the facilitator for the breakout room be the person with the most letters in their middle name. So when they arrived in the breakout room, if they thought their middle name had a lot of letters and they were willing to facilitate, they could let everyone know what their middle name was. If they didn't want to be a facilitator, they could just keep their middle name to themselves. And we asked that if 2 people had the same number of letters, whichever name was first in alphabetical order would determine who would facilitate. So you may want to pause the recording now and try this activity on your own. In the live version of this workshop, we asked participants to use the chat to respond to the question, what would you tell a new teacher about how to improve their students' emotional engagement? For students, explaining something to someone else is a way to mentally engage them, which is what we're going to talk about next. So you might want to pause the recording now to consider your response to this question, and then I will turn it back over to Mary.
Great. So now we're going to turn to mental engagement. This type of engagement requires mental energy. It's all the things a student needs to engage deeply with content. Here again is the definition we showed earlier of mental engagement. It is the mental energy exerted when engaging in schoolwork. Some examples of mental engagement include attention, concentration, and persistence. We are sure you can think of many others that could be included on this list. Here are a few things that the research tells us about mental engagement. Once again, much of the research on this type of engagement has been conducted in traditional in-person learning environments, but it sheds some light on why it is important to think about. For example, some research has shown that the use of metacognitive strategies, or methods that help students understand how they learn, has been associated with greater student achievement. An example of a metacognitive strategy might be monitoring how well you understand something, such as reviewing content that you didn't understand. In addition, some research suggests that students' mental engagement is higher when teachers both present challenging work and create a socially supportive classroom environment. This research suggests that when teachers focus only on academics, students might be more worried about making mistakes and disengage. Researchers have suggested 2 categories of strategies to promote mental engagement. Instructing refers to the ways in which educators share content with students, and collaborating refers to the ways in which students work together to co-create knowledge. Now I'll pass it back over to Jill.
Great, thanks. So again, this information is all in handout 1, but I'll just make a few points. Clearly, instructional techniques are the key to promoting mental engagement. You'll notice the first 3 bullet points are all about the importance of feedback. The materials provide some descriptions of active learning and instructional design principles. To the point about providing challenges, consider how what's challenging in remote learning environments might be different from what's challenging in in-person environments. And the last point about the relevance of tasks and instructional materials is not new, but it certainly bears thinking about with remote learning in mind. Again, this information is in handout 1. It talks about how all that we know about the importance of collaborative work is still true, even in an online environment. It may take some creativity to structure cooperative learning differently, and maybe our breakout sessions gave you some ideas about how to do that and about how to provide clear guidelines for online discussions. The last bullet point there seems a good one to end on before moving into our last breakout, which is how can you model good interaction in an online discussion? So we've just presented the research on student engagement. In the live workshop, we again sent participants to a breakout room to consider how those strategies could be adapted to work for their students in their context. Now, thinking about mental engagement is a big task. There are so many pieces involved that are out of your control, like students' prior learning, students' learning environments, the availability of appropriate materials, and the list goes on. However, as our model showed, you are not the only factor that impacts a student's engagement. There is also their personal network as well as their own independent efforts. So even if you just increase a student's engagement by 15%, that could very well fill the gap. For this activity, we asked participants to focus on what they can do and do immediately to improve students' mental engagement, to increase their attention, their concentration, their persistence, etc. The goal was to focus on what is within your discretion and ability, and whether you're teaching remotely or in person or both. This time in the breakout rooms, we asked participants to determine the facilitator by choosing a person whose town or city of birth would appear first on an alphabetical list. So if they were born in a town or a city that's early in the alphabet and they were willing to facilitate, they could let everyone know the name of their birthplace. If they had already facilitated, they could pass to the next person whose city is early in the alphabet. As always, anyone who didn't want to facilitate could pass or keep their information to themselves. You may want to pause the recording now to review the research in the handbook and to consider how you would respond to these prompts. After the breakout in the live session, we asked participants to respond to this fill in the blank check-in prompt. So one way of filling it in, for example, might be, I believe that I can help students increase their mental engagement because it is related to instructional techniques I already use. You may want to pause the recording now to consider how you would respond to this check-in. And then I'll turn this over to Victoria and Emma to wrap things up.
Thank you, Jill and Mary. That's a lot of great information and some interesting points. We hope you have a better understanding of the components of engagement and how you can help increase student engagement. Just to recap today, we talked about the 3 types of student engagement and the different types of strategies that can be used to support each. We created a shorter handout, handout 2, that provides a quick reference for the types of strategies you can use to support each type of engagement. Next, in the live workshop, we asked participants to reflect and share their feedback, thinking about the behavioral, emotional, and mental energy that you exerted during today's webinar. How engaged were you? Extremely engaged, moderately engaged, somewhat engaged, slightly engaged, or not at all engaged? If you present this workshop, the responses to this poll can give you and the group helpful feedback. You could perhaps also have a discussion about what was most engaging and what was least engaging and why. Take a moment to think about what you can do to make your presentation very engaging. Emma, now back to you.
Thanks, Victoria. Just as a quick reminder, we provided the following supports after each workshop to interested participants. When you're presenting this workshop, you may consider other supports that you can provide to teachers in your district to discuss and answer follow-up questions about the workshop material. This was the first in a 3-part series on research-based practices for effective remote learning. You can access recordings from the other workshops in this series on the REL Appalachia website. Workshop 2 on monitoring academic progress and providing feedback to students took place in January of 2021. Workshop 3 on designing effective instruction for a hybrid model was held in March of 2021. The REL Appalachia team acknowledges and thanks the partnership organizations, schools, and districts that took part in this collaborative coaching. Their voices and experiences were essential to the development of this resource. You can learn more about our work through the REL Appalachia website. You can also contact us via email, follow us on Twitter, or sign up for our newsletter. Thank you so much.